Rattlings have been living and farming in the vast fields of Brandemute for countless generations, perfectly happy to live out their lives away from the galaxy of big folk that dwell beyond their atmosphere. Their world is a simple one, a place of peace, plenty, and very little in the way of excitement. Wide grasslands and forests range across its diminutive surface, stitched with winding rivers and dotted by the occasional bustling township. It has no industry of note, and even its bountiful farms produce little more than what is needed to maintain its ravenous population. It was once said, by those who could be bothered to know the place at all, that Holy Terra herself could fall, and it would take Brandemute 1,000 years to realize that something was wrong. The planetoid was routinely overlooked by Imperial tithe collectors during its many millennia of habitation, due as much to its lack of exploitable assets as to its sheer dullness. Indeed, during time of war, the world would often be preemptively marked as destroyed by Munitorum bureaucrats, despite no enemy force ever paying more than a cursory glance at this backwater. However, in the few known cases when bands of Xenos or renegades did darken the skies of Brandemute, all met a similar fate. The invaders would land, ransack a handful of outlying farms, and, before they could proceed to any of the major settlements, would be cut down by sniper fire in the open fields. This was the handiwork of the Underhill Militia, some of the finest rattling marksmen the Imperial Guard have ever seen. The militia can trace their founding to the legendary Brandemute Brawl of M31, when the world became the site of a minor skirmish between a warband of orcs and a group of traitor Imperial army regiments that were fleeing the now-broken Siege of Terra. Rattling legends tell of how the great Groxbellow Underhill rallied the panicked townspeople, organizing them into an effective militia that drove off both the greenskins and the wicked big folk in a devastating series of ambushes and long-distance battles. Rattling custom claims that Groxbellow's slaying of the traitor general at close range with a thrown dagger not only won the war, but inspired the game of darts at the same time. When pursuing solo auxiliary forces arrived to find not a bastion of traitors or a nest of Xenos, but instead a bustling agri-world with freshly rebuilt towns and surprisingly well-fertilized fields, the previously overlooked planetoid was formally welcomed into the Imperium. Underhill himself would leave with the Imperial soldiers and a fellowship of his most hardy militiamen, vowing to forever make safe his world from the threats of the outside. Though he still took the time to ask his beloved people to, quote-unquote, smoke me a kippa, I'll be back for second breakfast. Since those days, Brandemute had steadily produced gaggle after gaggle of wide-eyed rattling youths, eager to travel the stars and find adventure. Whilst most would not get far before meeting their demise or turning back, others went on to prove themselves as determined and capable warriors. Their keen eyes and stout constitution made them some of the best infiltration operators across the tightest subsector, and many an army found a place for them in their ranks. Crusade Group 742, the most prominent fighting force of the pre-Cigatrix subsector, had a long history of employing whole fellowships of Underhillers to augment their fighting forces. Likewise, the infamous task force of the Tenebrum Irregulars always seemed to find a suitable role for the more courageous or foolhardy rattlings in furthering the interest of the Lacrosse family guild. Rogue traders, PDF forces, merchant security, criminal organizations, even inquisitors were known to take on Underhill militiamen once their skills had been proven. Their small stature, neat waistcoat, and oversized antique stub rifles were a common sight in a mercenary market across the subsector, though few knew what all these things meant, and even fewer cared. When a militiaman tired of their adventures, those who survived long enough to become tired, that is, they would often disappear from active service as quickly as they had joined. Many would find that their natural talent for stealth was as useful for evading commissars and shipboard security as it was for navigating the battlefield. This would also aid them in returning home free of charge, and it soon became custom on Brandemute to check every arriving merchant transport or grain hauler for stowaway rattlings who had dozed off and might otherwise miss their stop. Whilst many would come home with nothing more than the shirts on their backs and the rifles in their arms, plenty of others would return rich from the opportunities the wider galaxy had presented. These lucky few would regale their vast families with tales of adventure, trophies of great conquests, and the fantastic wealth to prove it, inspiring yet another generation to carry their rifle in turn and take their opportunity to see the stars. After the Great Rift tore the galaxy asunder, Brandemoot seems to have disappeared from all knowledge. A small planetoid orbiting a lonely star, this world was one of the first whose astral volume was abandoned in the wake of Imperial defeat. Considering the fate of many a mightier world in the Titus subsector, Brandemoot was likely little more than a small, inconsequential morsel to be swallowed without notice during the great glut that was the victory of the archenemy. However, it is this very ability to go unnoticed that has always served the Underhill militia well. It may be that the old proverbs were true and, despite the end of trade, the breaking of contact with the wider Imperium, and even the loss of the Emperor's light, Brandemoot continues on as it always has, farming and feasting, with rarely a thought paid to the galaxy or the big folk around them. After all, who would bother with a small, lonely planetoid when there are still whole worlds to conquer?